Hey there, and welcome back to Start Adventuring, a channel dedicated to empowering new roleplayers to break down their barriers and just start adventuring. I'm Baxter.
And I'm Ben. And in this video, we'll be talking about 3 lessons that we learned from running the 9th adventure from the Candlekeep Mysteries, Lore of Lurue, as a one-on-one, one-shot adventure. We'll be talking about how we think you can run this best at your table, kind of how it works best, and what things to kind of look out for as you're prepping it if you plan to run it at your table. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it.
Our first lesson is that this adventure requires a heavy amount of contextualization, meaning it's important that you make sure that your PCs have a specific reason, whether that's an internal or external reason of this story, for wanting or needing to do this adventure. Because as written, it's pretty amorphic and it feels like it doesn't really have a lot of stakes or depth other than learning new things, which is good, right. But it's a very specific motif that you'd use within a campaign.
Yeah, you might even consider changing what the story inside the lore of Lurue is, so that it's actual lore that might be relevant to your campaign. If you want it to be that learning this information is the reason that the players would play through it. As written, I mean, the only real reason is to get out of the book because they get sucked into it by opening it. But I think that it can make the players feel more engaged in the story if they're trying to learn a secret in the book, or they're trying to even change history or something by going back and experiencing this adventure. But I think also it's just about giving external stakes to entering into the book and getting to the end. Our second lesson is also to do with motivation, but it's less about the meta-narrative of why the players are going into the story and playing it to the end, and more about what their motivation is within the Lore of Lurue's story, right, or whatever story you end up putting in this storybook. I think this is especially true if you're running this as a one-shot like we did. You should try to give your players something inside the story to motivate them beyond just go to this point, go to the next point, go to the next point. Again, especially if the story is the adventure, because it's a one-shot. We talked about, as an option, giving them a role to play in the story. Right. You know, the protectors of the forest, or, you know, wanderers who happened upon a situation and changed the world or something. But contextualizing their role in the story is just as important as giving the player characters a reason to enter the story in the first place.
Right. And I think goes back to what in the first one we said, external or internal. I think this is the prime example of internal, right? In the story, why are the PCs interested in completing the tasks that need to be completed? Is it because they're changing history? Is it because they're protecting history? Or is it just because they're learning from history? And then, as the DM, what's the best way to distribute that information if they are just learning? Maybe, like you said, they play as different characters. I think a fun use for this specific format could even just be giving the PCs a fun one-off of, hey, these other NPCs that you know did this while you guys did this, and maybe they could play that adventure and see how it plays out, kind of a thing.
Right, or just giving them an opportunity to play different characters for a session or two.
Yeah.
You could also accomplish this with the NPCs in the world. I mean, if you made really lovable NPCs, but you don't always want to bank on how your players are going to react to your NPCs, unless you know your players very well and you know if it's this kind of NPC, they're really going to want to help. They're going to love that NPC. But you got to handle that with caution.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Our last lesson is that you need to find a way to break the railroad. And that can either be predisposed by the DM in prep, making it more like a sandbox kind of an experience more than a linear path. Or that could just look like giving the players a secondary objective, like we had with the beta test kind of a situation, so that there's an additional task or an additional kind of motivation that Eddie had for even being in the world or existing in that story.
Yeah, as written, the adventure is quite literally a single linear path. I almost imagined it even like a Disneyland dark ride. So giving hidden Mickeys to your players to look for is something else for them to do. Or encouraging the players to, push up against the enchantment and see if they can break the game. Every player loves that. There are quite a lot of, very chaotic parties who enjoy doing that kind of thing. I mean, you have to decide if that's the experience you're looking for in your running of this adventure. But the point is, find ways to engage the players either by giving them choices, giving them something else to do while they are experiencing the story around them, or even just making the combat encounters or the skill challenges particularly complicated and difficult, if that's the kind of thing your party engages with. Because if you run it as written, where it's like, there are invisible walls, there is one path you are walking through, unless the lore that's being given is extremely interesting to the party, it can very easily become a sort of railroady, not particularly interesting experience for your players.
Frankly, might as well have just read the book for information opposed to going back. It would have been fewer steps, so to speak. So again, it's just a very specific context in which this particular adventure shines. It could be done very, very interestingly and very creatively. But it again, it's a very specific environment and a structure that it would do the best with.
And I really do think that it works best in the context of a campaign that's running. Correct. Even if it's a one-off that takes place in your campaign world, having it be an isolated thing, you have to do a lot more work to contextualize it and make it engaging and interesting for you're just going to be in this place for one session, and this story is only going to be relevant for this one session situation.
Right. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that the players feel like there is ample reason to go into the story. They feel a reason to continue once they've gotten into the story. And lastly, they feel like they are making choices that matter, or at the very least have some level of free range, that it's not literally just a linear path from point A to point D that they are experiencing. Because that's never really going to be what a player wants to play.
Thanks so much for watching this video. As always, these are just our thoughts from running this as a one-on-one, single-session adventure. We had a good time with it, but we also see, a lot of ways that you can make it better if you run it at your table. So hopefully these are interesting and helpful tips for you. And let us know if you run it or if you're prepping it, what you think about this adventure and what you learned from running it in the comments down below. And please, if you've watched this video to the end, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It does a lot to help us out here on YouTube, and it means a lot to us.
Absolutely. And if you want to go the extra mile, we do have a Patreon, the link to which will be in the description box below. Any of the pertinent information is in that bottom right hand blue box. Additionally, we are going to be making some changes to our Patreon, so stay tuned for that exciting news. But otherwise, I think that does us for now. I'm Baxter.
And I'm Ben. And remember, start adventuring.
Just start adventuring.